It started with a letter, yellowed, brittle, and without a return address. It had no stamp, just a single word written in scratchy cursive. Listen. Paul Wren, a 48-year-old history teacher, recently moved into his late aunt's creaking countryside home after her sudden and unexplained passing. He found the letter buried under a loose attic floorboard while sorting through dust-covered boxes of forgotten trinkets. It wasn't the letter itself that unnerved him. It was how it was placed so carefully in an envelope, wrapped in a ribbon that hadn't aged a day. He sat on the edge of the attic's wooden beam, staring at the paper like it might start speaking. The attic was stuffy and dimly lit, with only a narrow window that spilled a thin line of grey light across the floor. Paul's hands trembled as he unfolded the paper. "Listen when it breathes," it read. Nothing else. No signature, no context. Just those 4 words. He frowned. Was it a prank? A leftover from one of his aunt's odd collections? He didn't know yet how deep those 4 words would claw into his mind. That night, Paul couldn't sleep. The house was too quiet, too still. At around 2:14 a.m., he awoke to what sounded like a faint whisper. It was so soft, it almost felt imagined, but it was followed by another and another. The whispers didn't form words. They were like exhalations, barely audible, like the house was sighing in its sleep. Paul sat up, rubbing his eyes. "Old pipes," he muttered, trying to ground himself in logic. But the moment he stepped out of bed, the floorboard groaned under his feet, and the whispers abruptly stopped. He walked slowly through the hallway, the walls tight and the air dry. When he reached the attic door, a draft of cold air brushed against his face, despite all the windows being closed. He opened the attic door with a cautious push, and it creaked open, revealing only darkness beyond the wooden steps. He stood there, staring up. The whisper returned, louder now, and unmistakably coming from above. Goosebumps rose on his arms. He whispered back, "Hello?" But the sound that replied wasn't his own voice. It was the exact same word, mimicked. Paul's chest tightened. There was something about hearing his own voice echoed back to him, warped and stripped of emotion, that hit a primal nerve. He slowly ascended the stairs, one hand gripping the railing, the other holding his phone with the flashlight on. As the beam swept across the attic, nothing moved. Just the same boxes, the same dust motes dancing in the stale air. But then, a soft knock from beneath the floorboards. He crouched, pressing his ear to the wooden planks. The knocking came again, rhythmic, deliberate. Then a long, shallow breath followed. It was so close. He flinched back, heart hammering. Paul had taught the horrors of history for 20 years. He knew the darkness men were capable of. But this wasn't something he could explain. Not yet. He stood up quickly, stumbled down the steps, and shut the attic door behind him, breath short, skin pale. Over the next few days, Paul tried to rationalize the noises. Animals in the walls, maybe a draft, even hallucinations from stress. But every night, the sounds returned. Whispers, mimicking his thoughts, breaths that weren't his. And then came the voice. It started one evening when Paul stood brushing his teeth, trying to ignore the cold that seemed to seep from every corner of the house. His own voice echoed softly from behind the bathroom mirror. "I know you hear me." He stumbled back, nearly dropping his toothbrush. "Who's there?" he demanded, but only silence answered. He tore the mirror off the wall, revealing nothing but crumbling plaster. That night, He didn't sleep at all. Instead, he sat in the living room with every light on, the letter on the table in front of him. Listen when it breathes. He read it over and over. Something was trying to communicate, but not in a way he understood. Paul set up an audio recorder in the attic, hoping to catch the sounds. He left it running overnight. The next morning, he sat with a cup of coffee and hit play. At first, only static, then creaking, then a whisper. Paul. His name, clear as day. He dropped the mug, shattering it across the floor. The voice spoke again. Don't leave. He couldn't breathe for a moment. That voice, it was his aunt's, but softer, raspier, as if drawn from the bottom of a well. He played it back 5 times. Each time, his hands grew colder. Each time, the breath at the end got longer. He finally turned it off, trembling. "What do you want from me?" he asked aloud. And somewhere upstairs, a door slammed shut. Paul called a local historian to ask about the house. The woman on the other end paused when he mentioned the address. That house used to be a sanatorium decades ago. Before it was a home, they kept people in the attic, claimed they were listening for things, said the air talked to them, whispers from inside the walls. Paul felt the blood drain from his face. When he returned to the attic, he noticed something he hadn't before. A section of the wall that didn't line up with the rest. Newer wood, nailed shut. He grabbed a crowbar and pried it open. Behind it, a narrow crawl space. Inside, he found a small wooden chair, shackles on the floor, and dozens of crumpled pages, each one saying the same thing. It only stops when you stop listening. Paul sat there for hours, surrounded by those papers, that single chair, and the echoes that never stopped. His aunt hadn't gone mad. She had been trying to contain whatever was trapped up there, trying to keep it from breathing too loudly. The last recording he made played back something new. Not a whisper, not a mimic, a scream. That night, Paul didn't leave the attic. He shut the door, locked it from the inside, and placed the recorder beside him. The final note he left simply read, "If you're reading this, don't listen, not even once." But it was too late for him. He had listened. When police found the house a week later, it was empty. No body, no trace. Only a recorder, playing static, and a single, breathy whisper that sounded like it was coming from inside the listener's own chest. It began with a knock, a slow, deliberate knock at the door across the hallway, 3 times, always at 2:11 a.m. Robert had noticed it the first night after moving into the old brownstone apartment in Baltimore's Mount Vernon district. He was a pragmatic man, mid-40s, divorced, an art restorer by trade, and he wasn't one to dwell on the strange. But there was something too rhythmic, too intentional about those knocks. No one ever answered. No one ever emerged. He'd asked the landlord about the room. "That unit's unoccupied," the old man grunted, not looking up from his newspaper. "Has been for years." Robert stared at the brass number plate on the door that night, 302. Its surface dulled with age. He waited, and sure enough, at exactly 2:11, 3 hollow knocks echoed down the hallway. He froze, a breath caught in his throat. He wasn't imagining it. The next night, he left his bedroom light on and stood behind the door to his own apartment, peeking through the peephole across the hall. When the time came, he saw nothing. No shadows, no No figures, just the sound. Knock, 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 followed by a silence that felt heavier than any sound. He backed away from the door, unease settling into his bones. The third night brought something new, a sound. Not a knock this time, but a whisper, soft, almost imperceptible, from behind the door, then silence. And just as he was about to turn away, he saw her. A woman in a faded yellow dress standing in the hallway, facing the door of 302. Her hands trembled, her lips moved, but no sound came out. Robert opened his mouth to speak, but she turned and vanished into the stairwell. He spent the following day knocking on neighbors' doors, asking about the woman. No one knew her. "Nobody lives across from you," one woman insisted, clutching her toddler protectively. "There hasn't been a tenant in 302 since the fire." Fire? That hadn't been mentioned. Robert felt a slow chill climb his spine. That night, he pressed his ear to the door, and for the first time, he heard his own name whispered back. The next evening, he waited by the stairwell, hoping to see the woman again. Hours passed. Just as he was about to give up, she reappeared, walking silently down the hall, her head tilting slightly as if listening to something behind the door. This time, her eyes met his, and they were wide with terror. She mouthed a word he couldn't quite catch. Then she vanished, as if absorbed by the air. Unable to sleep, Robert began inspecting every inch of his apartment. He found it tucked behind a loose panel under the sink. An old, mold-stained journal belonging to a former tenant named Elaine. The entries were erratic, paranoid. "He watches from the door," one line read. Another, "If you acknowledge him, he follows." The more he read, the more the entries deteriorated into obsessive repetition. "Don't look, don't look, don't look." One entry chilled him completely. "He knocks at 211. If you hear it, do not respond, ever, no matter what voice he uses." The handwriting had shifted by the end of the journal. No longer elegant cursive, but erratic slashes, as if written in panic. The final page simply said, in letters so deep they tore the paper, "I opened it." Robert kept the journal on his nightstand, reading it obsessively. He began comparing the handwriting, tracing every pen stroke with his finger. One night, he swore he saw a fresh sentence appear. "You're already listening." He dropped the journal and backed away, knocking over a lamp. The pages fluttered open, and the air smelled faintly of burnt hair. That night, the knocks came again. But this time, Robert felt drawn, not curious, compelled, as if the space behind that door was pulling him in. He stood before 302, his hand hovering near the knob, his breath shallow. The whispering returned, louder now, layered voices, some pleading, some sobbing. He stepped back, heart racing, and fled into his room. Sleep came only in broken fragments. In one dream, he saw the woman in yellow again, only this time she was inside his apartment, standing at the foot of his bed. Her eyes were wide and lifeless. "Don't let him in," she rasped. He jolted awake, soaked in sweat, and when he sat up, he found muddy footprints leading from his door to the edge of his bed. The next morning, he inspected the hallway again, measuring the distance from door to door, scanning for hidden microphones, speakers, anything. But the hallway was ordinary. Too ordinary. He knocked on 302 himself. Nothing. Then he placed his palm against the wood. It felt warm. Robert tried to stay away from the door, but the obsession grew. He set up a camera in the hallway. He watched hours of footage. And at 2:11 each night the same thing. 3 knocks, the sound of breathing, and once a flicker of something standing just outside the frame, something tall, too tall, and its head was turned the wrong way. The whispers began following him into his apartment, into his dreams, into his waking thoughts. He could no longer separate real from imagined. He called his ex-wife in tears. "I'm losing it, Mary," he confessed. "There's something in that room, and I think it knows me now." She begged him to leave. He packed a bag, but the next night the whispers said, "Don't go, we're almost ready." Even his own reflection betrayed him. He'd catch glimpses of himself with a shadow behind his shoulder, long fingers, eyes like mirrors. One evening, the voice on the phone, pretending to be Mary, said, "You belong to it now." When he called her again, the real Mary hadn't spoken to him in days. He couldn't resist anymore. On the 7th night, Robert stood at the door of 302, the journal clutched in his hand like a Bible. "Elaine," he whispered, not knowing why. The door creaked open on its own. What he saw inside should have killed him from fear. The room was charred black, still bearing the marks of fire damage, but untouched by time. Furniture sat melted into the walls. In the corner, facing away from him, stood a figure with wet hair hanging past its shoulders. It slowly turned. It had no face. Robert screamed. He tried to run, but the door slammed shut behind him. Trapped. In the hallway, the camera caught only silence. No knocks that night. No whispering. Just a still, empty corridor. The next morning, no one answered his door. Lights were on inside, but no movement. The mail piled up. His phone went dead. They found the apartment deserted 2 weeks later. Robert's belongings were still there, undisturbed. No signs of struggle. The footage from the hallway camera was mysteriously erased from the last 2 nights. Neighbours say they still hear the knocks at 2:11. Some say they see a man standing behind the peephole of 302 now. A man in a faded yellow shirt, muttering things only he understands. No one opens the door, not anymore. And some nights, if you pass through Mount Vernon and pause outside the 3rd floor window of that building, you might see someone watching, waiting, with eyes like mirrors. They say you never really know your neighbours. That's what Diane always thought when she passed by the quiet beige house across the street. It sat there like a sealed box. Windows closed, curtains drawn, yard meticulously trimmed, but never a soul in sight. Diane had lived on that street for 12 years. She knew the mailman's kids' birthdays, which dog belonged to which family, and who overwatered their hydrangeas. But that house, a complete mystery. Then came the morning of June 7th. She was sipping her coffee by the window, absent-mindedly watching the street, when movement caught her eye. The door to the beige house opened. A man stepped out, tall, mid-40s, glasses with thick black rims, wearing a maroon cardigan that looked a size too big. He carried a small trash bag and walked to the curb. Nothing unusual, but Diane's hand froze mid-sip. Because the moment he looked up, he smiled, directly at her. Not at the neighbourhood, not at the air, at her. Diane jerked back from the window instinctively, her breath caught in her chest. Had he been watching me too? She thought. That night, she couldn't shake the look from his face. It wasn't creepy, not exactly, but there was something too familiar about it, like the kind of smile someone gives after spending hours flipping through photos of you. 3 days passed. The man came out every morning at exactly 8:12 a.m., took out a small trash bag, looked up at Diane's house, and smiled each time, without fail. And he never waved, never blinked, just that same slow, knowing smile. Diane started to feel it tightening around her, like invisible twine. Her husband, Greg, dismissed it. "You're just being paranoid. Maybe he's just being friendly." But Diane wasn't the only one who noticed. Her neighbour, Linda, 2 doors down, brought it up one afternoon while trimming her rose bushes. "He ever look at you?" she asked, nodding toward the beige house. Diane's heart stuttered. "Yes," she said cautiously. Linda leaned in, voice low. "He watches me sometimes. From the second-floor window, just stands there. I told my husband, but he laughed it off, said I'm flattering myself. But it doesn't feel like flattery, Diane. It feels like being catalogued." That word hit hard. Catalogued, like an object, not a person. That night, Diane didn't sleep. At 2:13 a.m., a creaking sound stirred her from bed. She padded to the window. The beige house was dark, except for the upstairs window. A faint, flickering glow. She squinted. Something moved. A figure just behind the glass. He was standing there, motionless, watching her house. But it wasn't just him. It was the wall behind him, covered in photographs, hundreds of them, all the same size, all pinned neatly in rows. The light flickered again. For a split second, she saw one photo clearly. It was of her. She gasped and stumbled back from the window, hand over her mouth. Greg jolted awake. "What? What is it?" "He's got pictures of me," Diane whispered. "On his wall. Dozens. Maybe more." Greg stood, half asleep and groggy, and made his way to the window. But the room across the street had gone dark. He didn't believe her. Maybe it was the light playing tricks. "You've been tense lately." But Diane knew what she saw. The next day she filed a report. The police sent someone to knock, but no one answered. They said without a clear threat or evidence, there wasn't much they could do. That night, another envelope was slipped under their door. No stamp, no name. Inside were 6 photographs, all of Diane, all taken through her own windows. Diane's world unraveled. She barely left the house. Every sound felt sinister, every shadow too dark. Greg insisted on installing cameras, but they caught nothing. No movement, no deliveries, no prowling, just silence. Then one morning, Greg didn't come home from work. Diane called and called. Nothing. Hours passed. Panic set in. That evening, the doorbell rang. She raced to it, thinking it might be him, but found only a small square box. Inside, Greg's wedding ring, still warm, and a note. "I wanted you all to myself." Police swarmed the neighborhood. They broke into the beige house. What they found made headlines. The second floor had been converted into a shrine to Diane. Walls lined with photos, locks of her hair, even audio recordings of her voice from phone calls she hadn't realized were tapped, and a hidden basement. Greg was there, alive, but drugged and disoriented, tied to a chair, surrounded by sketches of Diane's face drawn from every imaginable angle. Her voice played on repeat in the background, but the man, her stalker, was gone. Months passed. Greg recovered, but their lives were fractured beyond repair. They moved far away, changed names, started over. Yet sometimes, Diane would wake at 8:12 a.m., heart racing, because she never saw the man again. But the feeling never left, that she was still being watched, that one day she'd look up and he'd be smiling at her again. A year later, in a quiet coastal town 3 states away, Diane tried to rebuild some form of peace. Greg had taken a night job, and she spent her evenings curled up with books, trying to forget. One evening, she opened a newly purchased mystery novel from a used bookstore. A photo slipped out. Her breath hitched. It was her, again, sitting on their new porch. The picture couldn't be older than 2 weeks. Scribbled on the back, "You look happiest when you think I'm gone." She dropped the book and ran outside. The street was empty, still, but something shifted inside her. He wasn't gone. He'd simply changed the rules. That night, she went to the police again. New town, new faces, new skepticism. But this time, she insisted they search local camera footage. Focus on her home. Days passed, and then, one clip. A man in a maroon cardigan, walking calmly across the street. At 8:12 a.m., no face visible, just the back of his head. They never found him, but Diane knew, because 2 weeks later, on her birthday, she woke to a knock at the door. On the welcome mat lay a single photograph, herself, sleeping, with a note, "I'll wait forever if I have to."